Hi, welcome to the tech series where we break down the biggest tech trends in three simple questions: what, why, and how. So today's topic is about generative AI. It might sound complex, but do not worry. We are here to make it as easy as possible, quick, and let's make it a little fun too. So, whether you are an executive, a team leader, or just curious about the latest tech, this is the place to be. So, let's jump in and see what generative AI is all about. So, what exactly is generative AI? Let's try to answer this question in an extremely simplistic manner. When a new content is created by an artificial intelligence, that's called generative AI. And that new content can be of any format. It can be in the form of text, image, video, music, voice, uh, whatever format an artificial intelligence can create, it's called as a generative AI. Now, the other question is, how does it create a new content? Somebody will have to give it instruction, right? You're spot on there. So in order for the generative AI to create a content, you need to provide instructions. You describe that in a small chat dialog box. And based on the description, it starts answering all sort of questions. It can be summarizing a complex information or even generate a diverse idea for that matter. But the instructions that you provide, that's called as a prompt. And the prompt can also be to an extent where you say like, hey, create a short story for kids, or I would like you to generate a new painting, or it can be creating a piece of code or even musical composition for that matter. But anything that an artificial intelligence can create, that's basically called as a generative AI. Okay, let's move on to the next question on how generative AI works. At a broader sense, there are only two steps in developing a generative AI. One is develop a new artificial neural network and you train the neural network model. But where did this idea come from? It came from the idea of human brain. So I think that's a very good place to start. Once you understand the concept of human brain at a simplistic terms, then you can correlate to how this artificial neural network has been developed and trained. So let's start with the human brain because that's the foundations to understanding the generative AI. And in order for me to define how a human brain works, I would like to refer to a book from Jeff Hawkins called On Intelligence. I would strongly suggest you to read that book. It's a very interesting hypothesis being presented there. But as per the Hawkins hypothesis, if you look at human brain at a neuron level, the brain works by continuously predicting what's going to happen next and then learning from the differences between its prediction and its reality. Okay, so to improve its prediction ability, the brain builds an internal representation of the world. Okay, so as per the theory, the human intelligence actually emerges from this process. So that's exactly how a generative AI works, and I think the moment you understand how a human brain works, it would be very easy for us to correlate on how it's been developed. Okay, so moving on to the next step. On the next step is developing a new artificial neural network. So in order for us to understand what a neural network is, let's take a simple analogy of you having a spreadsheet, but these spreadsheets are present in a three-dimensional space. They are stacked in the form of layers, and that's exactly how a neural network is being designed to. Okay, so in the AI world, the neuron is called a cell, and each layer so they are basically stacked in layers. These neural networks have multiple layers, And each layer will have tens or thousands of artificial neurons. But again, the measure is not the number of neurons. It is about how strongly these cells or neurons are connected, not only from within the layer, it's also from one layer to the other. So the measurement is on how strong these connections are. So these connections are basically called as coefficients, and more generally, you might be hearing the word weights or parameters. So you might also heard a lot of information in the news or in the blockchain, like the GPT-3 has been trained on billions of parameters, and GPT-4 is trained on trillions of parameters. That's exactly what we are talking about. So the measurement is on the the connections between these neurons, aka weights and parameters. Okay, so there are basically a handful of neural network architectures with different characteristics uh, that prove themselves to be producing content in a particular modality. Okay, so the transformer architecture is a good example for the generative AI use cases. So moving on, once we develop that layers of uh, neural network, and each layer having tens or thousands of neurons, and trying to make sure they are very well connected, because that's a measurement. After doing that, the large language model is goes into a training phase. We give it enormous volumes of text, images, videos, even musical notes to process, and also it's given as task of training with small simple predictions. Like it might be like, okay, I give you a word, I want you to predict the next word that might occur uh, in the format, or trying to generate a correct order of a set of sentences. uh, but in early stages, the model predictions are not very good. Each time the model predicts a token, it checks for correctness. It might be wrong, it might be right. So it basically checks for both. Whether it's right or wrong, the algorithm adjusts that parameter. When I say adjust the parameter, the coefficients or the weights between these connections. So after the model has repeated this process for trillions of tokens, it basically becomes good at predicting the next word or the next pixel that needs to be generated as part of your image. Uh, Basically, that's how a generative AI works. So let's move on to the next question. Why generative AI is important? So think of generative AI as a calculator, but it's used for creating new contents. Can you imagine a life without a calculator these days? It's just not possible, right? Because a calculator basically automates the routine and mundane uh, math, freeing up a person to focus on higher level tasks. So, similar to that, generative AI has a very high potential to automate the more routine and mundane subtasks that make up most of the knowledge work these days. And that frees up the people to focus on higher level parts of the job. Let's try to imagine from a business perspective. An organization wants to obtain an actionable insights for it to take any strategic decisions. uh, it's just not possible today uh, because of the unstructured, inconsistent, and disconnected data that's stored in disparate systems. It might be in the form of files stored in file storage, in the form of data stored in databases, or stored in unstructured fashion in the form of a data lake environment. But in order for us to uh, provide an actionable insights for the business to take strategic decision, it's just not possible with that type of an inconsistent data. So how the traditional systems function is, in order for us to provide that type of an consolidation, you will have to do a fair bit of data engineering, and that's time consuming, it's expensive. So because of that, it becomes difficult for the organization to quickly take a decision. So, whereas let's look at the modern Gen AI systems with introduction of LLMs and other Gen AI architectures, how would it be if I can just feed in information in the form of a prompt and then ask the generative AI to generate key insights? It can be a feedback or also provide sentiment analysis. It'll just work. The generative AI is capable of doing that. So the power of LLM here is to skip that massive costly engineering step. So that's one perspective we could think about why generative AI is very important in the modern era. So let's move on to the next question. What are the common applications of generative AI? So let me answer this question from my own experience and key observations. The first use case I could think about is spotting and explaining errors. So generative AI can basically search any text for mistakes. It might be in the form of informal emails to professional writing samples. So generative AI can look for mistakes and try to explain and also provide inputs towards how you can mitigate those errors. The next use case is filling knowledge gaps on demand. This is by far my favorite because it has become so much easier now to go ask generative AI a question in a natural format, and it just gives you the response for all the things that you need to uh, look for an answer. So generative AI tools can answer workers' general or specific questions to point them in the right direction when they get stuck on anything from simplest queries to complex operations. The other area where generative AI is becoming popular is streamlining code and troubleshooting. We are seeing the co-pilots being used a lot in your development environment so that it can help you in augmenting some of the tasks that's done on a day-to-day basis by a developer, and also it can also help you in identifying what might be the issue. If you might be getting some runtime issues, and it can help you in identifying where uh, that issue might be occurring and how to solve those problems. So it's an excellent use case. The other use case is assisting in medical image analysis. Medical providers are using generative AI to scan these medical records and images and try to identify abnormalities. Sometimes it's difficult for a medical provider to analyze those inputs. So that's where generative AI can basically deep dive into those areas and identify abnormalities and give recommendations to the doctors for better treatment and resolution. The other use case is reducing administrative workload, especially if a business has heavy administrative work. It might be in the form of billing, invoicing, or automating complex tasks like filling documents and submitting notes. These things can be easily automated using generative AI. The other favorite is enhancing communication across languages and styles. So it has become so much easier for us to translate the languages these days, using generative AI, and also try to understand the style and the language differences that we have. So basically generative AI can summarize those conversations, try to help the other person understand the communication in a better way. I think these are by far the most common use cases, but there are more use cases that's been researched in the market. I think we can add on to it as we go further towards the generative AI journey. Well, that's it for today, everyone. Hope you enjoyed this video. We hope generative AI feels a bit more familiar now. But please do not forget to follow us for more quick insights into tech trends that matter. And hey, let us know in comments what tech you would like to cover next. Until then, here is to making tech simpler, one question at a time. Thank you.